sense of what market capitalization, whether it's 5 billion or so, which is a significant.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone had a great lunch, and thanks for coming to our talk of expert panel on automating what is historically something that people do manually. And so I'm Mark Dillon. I work for a utility company in Ontario. We have about 160,000 customers. We have about 320 employees. It's called Enova Power. It's a recent merger of Kitchener and Waterloo, if you knew who those were. And to me, what it means in my world is that right now I have a bunch of controls that I'm supposed to comply with, that our business is supposed to comply with. And so an example might be all communications need to be encrypted during transit. And so we check once a year. We file with our auditor that, yeah, that's a thing that's true at this point in time. But if someone were to introduce a new communications path like plain text telnet, I don't know that we'd notice until we went and looked to attest again, necessarily. And so this is about automating that process of attestation, which is something that almost every industry is required to do against some sort of framework. And I'm going to pass it on to my fellow panelists to walk through who they are and what this means to them in their industry.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining. So I'm Parul Khanna. I work as the Director of Information Security for Manulife Financial. Broadly speaking, my role is more into the governance aspect of it, where I drive strategic initiatives to ensure that there, yes, is kind of like consistency between the different processes, between different segments, so on and so forth, and then aligning our standard operating procedures with our standards. I'm also a passionate instructor at York University in the evenings. So yeah, this is something a lot of folks ask me. How do I manage kind of like two jobs? And there's no secret sauce for it, but there's just like one keyword, and that's like passion. And I'm also engaged in a lot of other volunteering opportunities, especially with ISC2 and then ASACA. Yes, with regards to this topic, this is kind of like near and dear to the heart. So yes, I'm looking forward to engage in an insightful discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you. My name is Ruzbe Teheriniya. I'm the Director of Identity Access Management Program at CPP Investments. I'm filling in for Sushil, who unfortunately couldn't be with us, so shout out to him. For me, and as part of this discussion, continuous attestation is primarily around attestation of user access and what people have access to within an organization as part of the continuous monitoring context.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Liran Chen. I'm the VP of System Engineering for the Americas for a company called Forescout. What we do, we see every asset, we assess its risk, and we try to protect it. This topic is very, very close to my heart, and we've been doing it for about 9 to 10 years at Forescout. Because, and why I think it's important, I think from audit to audit, it's something that is manual. It's done every year or every quarter, depends on your industry. But what we are seeing of late is that the trends of the cost associated with the data breach is increasing year by year, as well as the sequence and the repetitive action of those attacks, and zero-day attacks. For example, zero-day vulnerabilities. I'll just give you one trend to show you how critical it is. In 2020, we've seen 22 zero-day attacks, zero-day vulnerabilities that turn into attack. In 2021, it was 50. Now, in 2023, it was about 92 zero-day vulnerabilities and attacks. And the time from the zero-day vulnerability findings to the remediation of it or to the attack, instead of going from months and years, it's minutes and hours. Just one example, I don't know if you've heard about the Move It appliances attack. Literally, it's a very dominant appliance for secure file transfers used by a lot of financial institutions. The vulnerability was found in June 1st of June in 2023. There were 2,700 attacks, successful attacks, within 4 days by June 5th. And it goes back to the point that if this telnet occurs, I need to know about it now in real time. So this single vulnerability impacted 2,700 organizations and 93 million customers. And it's one of 92 in 23. And unfortunately, 24, it's not looking better than 23. So, thank you.
So right now, all of us have to be focused on a thing that we're measuring at some frequency, which we can all probably agree is way too infrequent. And this approach, how is it different from that traditional type of security? Does anyone want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take that, and maybe my my friends here can definitely chime in. So I think in a traditional model or in a traditional approach, we were talking about, yes, there has to be periodic assessments, or maybe in the form of periodic audits, right? Which kind of estimates or tells us about the security posture of an organization. Now, what is lacking here is in terms of how do we want to be proactive. So this is the key, and this is, I think, the gist of where we talk about continuous attestation and assurance lies. And I think it's important to understand the distinction between the two. So if we talk about the continuous assurance, this is more related to continuous monitoring, having those kinds of automated checks in place. Real-time monitoring, making sure that there's kind of regular vulnerability scans, there is automation, there is integration, so on and so forth. And when we talk about attestation, this kind of is a subset of your particular continuous assurance, where it definitely means we are validating the security controls, whether in the form of our risk assessments or other exercises taken within an organization. So the difference from a traditional approach, I would say it's more about being proactive, where we are following continuous monitoring, where we know that, yes, there is going to be an early response to our incidents, there is going to be real-time monitoring, real-time alerts. So, thank you.
Is it open? It's on now. So in the context of IAM, when it comes to continuous attestation, what needs to be looked at and examined closely is the fact that user attestation is historically a compliance-driven activity that is happening once a year, once a quarter, depending on the type of account that you have and the type of compliance regime that you're on. When we're talking about this type of event-based monitoring related type of attestation that is triggered, this is no longer a compliance activity necessarily, it's more of a cybersecurity activity. So it needs to be looked at with that lens. And one of the things that is different about it, and I have recommended this in the past, is not to treat it differently. One example is the annual attestation is an individual's entire scope of access is being attested by their managers or data owners. In this particular case, my recommendation has always been to narrow the scope down to what is actually very important to attest, only critical systems and applications, critical data. and this goes back to, you know, that annual attestation, that compliance activity suffers quite often from what's considered, what's we call it rubber stamping, where manager looks at the access and says, maintain everything. It's too many line items for me to go through. Whereas in this case, it's quite important. So building that understanding and letting them know that we're giving you a subset of, you know, 5 things you need to look at versus the 50 things you look at the end of the year. This is quite important. You need to pay attention to it. And we need to reduce the rubber stamping aspect of attestation for this.
So something clicked for me there when you said compliance driven, because often, even if the framework is great, then you're just doing it for that reason. Oh, the auditors are in and they want to see that we turned this person's account off because they left last year, and they want to see a log of when we did it. And often what that does is it puts the responsibility about caring about the problem not in the right hands. Maybe it's in a regulatory division or a finance division instead. Maybe they're filling things out because they have to, because it's part of some other package, and they may not even fully understand the answers. I'm sure we've all seen it before when you show up at a place and look at last year's filled out and you're like, oh, none of that's true. It's the wrong person filled this out.
Absolutely.
So to measure the kind of thing you'd be worried about in an automated way, I mean, it just clicked for me. That's awesome.
Absolutely. One thing I'd like to add, and just click with me what you said. So one of the recommendations I always make is that when an attestation is triggered as part of a monitoring activity and, you know, goes out to managers, system owners to attest the user's access, it's not just a corner of the desktop of activity where you just like maintain, revoke, and sign off and done with it. It's a catalyst for conversation. Pick up the phone, go get on Teams, stand up from the cubicle and talk to the person and say, I just got this attestation triggered by your activity. What was it why did you do this? It builds that level of better understanding of what the activities are common, what's considered abnormal, and also builds deterrence within the organization.
Have you been part of bringing that in anywhere?
Pardon me?
Do people, I'd be worried initially people would feel persecuted by having the spotlight shining on them. Hey, you just touched this important thing. Do you think that would create any resistance?
At the beginning, absolutely. What I've noticed is that people who are the subject of attestation, like you said, they get jittery and they wonder what's happening to them. So it's a lot of communication, awareness, and training that goes along with it to let them know these are the triggers. This is what triggers an activity, triggers an attestation, and we need to look at it. We need to speak about it. Whether it's about adjusting the control, adjusting the trigger and the events, or adjusting the behavior.
Yeah, the one term that you use that I think it's super important for continuous monitoring and continuous assurance is the proactiveness aspect of it. So what we are seeing in a lot of corporations is that you have all of the telemetry in the world. You have your EDR, you have your vulnerability assessment, you have your data leakage prevention tools, but none of them are connected to an insight. How do I take all of the data that I have and make sure that I'm proactively protecting against the next attack? What logic should I apply, or what workflows should I apply if anomaly occurs? And I think what we've did in many, many years, we said, are you compliant? Yes, I'm compliant. I have a SIEM. I have a place where I store all of my data, all of my logs. But how are there any insights you got out of it? How are you getting better from one year to the other? And this is a question that we have to ask ourselves as a practitioners. So the recommendation I would have for you, it's not to start and find the new shiny tool, but get and salvage or leverage the telemetry that you currently have and build systems, if it's in the threat detection and response space or user behavior space, something that take the data logs and make sense out of them. We have a lot of capabilities with AI and machine learning that can help in that front and automate. And literally what I'm trying to say here, you want to be compliant on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. At the moment you are not compliant, something bad would happen, and then it will take you a while to respond. That's what we are seeing again and again and again.
Yeah, and kind of like just to add to that, I mean, that's a very good point. In terms of when we talk about like automation, we have been hearing this, that yes, there should be like automation. Obviously, it comes with its own kind of like challenges. Now, automation versus like orchestration. These two terms are kind of like sometimes it's used interchangeably, but yes, there is kind of like difference between these two terms for sure. And when we talk about like automation, it's more about, okay, I want to run this particular vulnerability scan on a periodic basis. So there I go, they've kind of like automated my task. When it comes to like your orchestration, the integration of these different automation tasks in order to like create a workflow, that exactly what leads to your orchestration. So it is, I think, with the complexities, with the increasing demand for continuous assurance as well as attestation, it becomes increasingly imperative that yes, we start adopting like some of the source solutions, which is more about your automation and response, which kinds of like proves that yes, there is early detections, you have the right automation and fails, and in case like something breaks, there is this automated notification that kinds of like gets triggered. So.
Yeah, I think I have one more question first. And not for the purpose of a sales pitch, but like, what are the shiny tools? Like, what's actually out there that's evolving into the availability of this landscape? Because I can imagine them, but I'm not fully aware of them. And are there any concerns we have about how they do or don't work together, or how your company might be going out to buy the catch-all thing, but it's not really there because it wasn't thought through? You talked about using the telemetry you already have. What sorts of things are we going to be seeing our peers and our vendors talking about that are new capabilities in this sort of automation?
So the automations, and I'm talking from a little bit of experience. Forescout is involved in two major continuous and insurance programs in the federal space in the United States, and both of the agencies. It's called CDM, Continuous Diagnostics and Monitoring, and Comply to Connect, C2C. And again, going back to leveraging your telemetry, absolutely, you've spent millions of dollars on the tools that you currently have. All of you have an endpoint security solution. You would have a vulnerability assessment solution. You would have compensating controls like firewalls, et cetera, et cetera. All of them provide a lot of information. What we used to do in the past, and it's very simple, all of us are taking all of this information, put it into a log. This is what we refer to the SIEM. In those days, I think, we need to think a step further. What happens if I was attacked right now? And this is going back exactly to the SOAR solutions, the orchestration solutions and automation solution. What if my data center is right now under attack from a zero-day vulnerability that we just mentioned, the MoveIt appliance, for example, right? How do I react to that? How do I proactively segment my network to make sure that if one area is impacted, the rest are not impacted? Those are the questions that you need to ask yourself. And the solutions that you would have, you cannot go and buy, and this is the challenge in our space. For example, everybody, including us, if you would Google Zero Trust, any vendor out of the 3,000 vendors in cybersecurity would have something to say about Zero Trust. But Zero Trust for you, and for you, and for you means something totally different. And what you need to do to take what you have, figure out how do you mitigate the risk, and think about it in a risk-minded perspective. What would happen if this would happen? For example, somebody would access my VPN. Somebody would access my data. Somebody would take a user account and use it. Or, in today's world, API keys, right? You are sharing so much information. Every web page that you open has about 30 to 50 different APIs in order to give you the one pane of glass of weather, the stock market, et cetera, et cetera. Those are dozens of APIs that builds that. And I'm sure that you have an application in your environment that collects all of this information. How do we make we are sure that none of those areas are open to us as well? Where we are focused right now, Forescout, is on the CPS, the cyber physical systems. And when you look into those cyber physical systems, you go into a hospital, for example, you would see an MRI, an infusion pump, an X-ray, a CT device, and all of those, guess what? All of those are talking on the internet, and there are dozens of vulnerabilities, and their shelf cycle is years, maybe decades. An hospital would buy an MRI in 1997 that runs Windows XP, which was the state of the art, and guess what? This MRI still serve the hospital. So in the IoT space, we see this, what we refer to supply chain risk, in a much greater volume. So there are many areas on which you have to look into where is my telemetry, what insight can I get from my telemetry, and how do I proactively mitigate those solutions via compensating control that I can automate and orchestrate. I hope it was a long enough question, but how do you deal with that, if I may ask? Anyone wants to share this generic challenge with continuous monitoring?
Yeah, so right. So I was going to say, I've seen attempts at this sort of stuff.
That's it. I don't deal with it. That's why I'm here to learn.
So I've seen attempts at sort of stuff. So for example, an email that goes out because someone uses an administrative login, right? These are all little pocketed things. I think this discussion's about something much bigger, about building a whole system around the things that we need to attest to, so that they become orchestrated by design instead of compliance-driven once a year. And we've got a group of people here who are experts in doing exactly this. So I would say, is anyone in the audience thinking, oh, I'd love to do that, I wish I didn't do that manually, where do I start? Those kinds of things. Is there anyone going down this journey right now that's in the audience? Is this as new to everyone as it was to me? Conceptually, the idea makes sense. Yes?
So, I mean, just to play up his question, everybody wants to know. So to me, doing a SOC 2 or an ISO or something else, access is important, you know, so we may look at quarterly privileged, semi-annual regular users, or even annual users, right? But people are flowing through the system daily, weekly, you know, how do you monitor that? So, I mean, if I have access to systems ABC on day 1, but my access has changed on day 60, and I now also have system D, what's the catch for that? And maybe I shouldn't have had system D. Where's the approval for all of that? So I think that's what I'm thinking about with continuous monitoring and things like that. And I think your point right at the beginning is someone spins up an insecure way to communicate. How do you see that, right? Or someone's using Dropbox, which is an unapproved way to share data, right? Because they're doing shadow IT off the side of their desk.
Maybe I can take this one. So that's an excellent question, actually. So in my experience, and going back to what my colleague was just mentioning around, you know, telemetries being there and the data elements being there, sometimes the cybersecurity function or the IAM function can make sense of those telemetries, like when you're detecting a lateral movement. That's something that, you know, your monitoring tools can pick up, and those are the things that can trigger attestation or, you know, from a detective control perspective, but also your preventative side of, you know, blocking it, freezing it, disabling the account, not letting it move. Part of it comes by engaging the actual operations or business, something that the cybersecurity function by itself will not have enough insights for. One example of that is if we're talking about, say, a customer service application in retail banking. If you see somebody pulling up multiple records of multiple customers, within cybersecurity, it's meaningless to all. Those telemetries mean nothing to cybersecurity function. It's the retail banking needs to come and let us know that if you see this behavior of somebody pulling up multiple records, this is something abnormal happening potentially, that you need to block it or trigger something. The other aspect of that is from a authentication perspective. From cybersecurity perspective, we know who hasn't logged into Active Directory, whether they're using an application or their device. But we won't know if somebody has not logged into a particular, again, retail application, retail banking application. That's something that the business has to come and let us know, that if you see somebody has not logged into, somebody who's from HRIS perspective, from HR, is in customer service, has not logged into this customer service application, retail banking application for a month, what's happened to them? Are they on leave and HR is not telling us? Have they moved roles and changed roles and HR is not telling us? But it's not normal for L1, who's on the phone, supposed to be like constantly on this application, having not used it. we on the cybersecurity side, we will not know that telemetry comes to us, but it's meaningless unless business makes sense of it for us. Does that answer your question?
So that goes back to the theme that I always wish that I had more time to complete within our company, which is getting your baseline patterns and then taking time to analyze any deviations from what you just talked about, for example, right? You may not even need to know or be informed that customer service rep's logging into that system every day. You would say the baseline has been, for the past 6 months, they have been. Why is it wildly different? And what's that threshold to not be a false positive? And from an organization that is regulated by an external body, which makes sense because we're power transmission, we didn't get extra dollars when that power transmission, when those burdens of compliance came along, and I'm sure that's a very common story. And so there's a labor component. My first instinct is to fully think it out, right? Okay, how should this work? What's the whole system going to look like? But clearly that's not working. Is there another approach to building this out in smaller chunks? Like where should people start?
Yeah, I would say, first, you should be able to first, analyze, okay, what is exactly my environment, or what exactly are my constraints, where exactly my limitations, understanding your environment, understanding your dependencies, your tech stacks, your platform, everything kind of goes a part of it. And then, I would just emphasize that in terms of rollout, follow a more or less kind of a phased approach, which means that yes, you are able to take it up to a smaller scale, and then you kind of start magnifying from there. This is because easily, if you start if you start applying anything to a large scale, yes, you are bound to fail. It's setting yourself up for a failure. When you start applying it across the smaller chunks, there are lessons learned. You understand that, okay, this was kind of overlooked. There is more limitations, there are more constraints, and we need to work around, or maybe if we need to switch to another vendor, or so on and so forth. And that's how you kind of start the rollout and integrated phased approach. Obviously, there are kind of integration challenges. There could be challenges in terms of the resource consumptions as well, and this is where you bring in your skilled expertise. Maybe you outsource it, you bring in subject matter experts to take that particular piece of advice. So, but it has to be done in a very, what do we say, a step-by-step approach.
One thing I'd like to add to what you just mentioned is it is challenging, and part of the challenge is that for a lot of folks within business, not necessarily cyber IAM, but for a lot of folks within business or operations, this is a new way of thinking, it's a new paradigm. So giving them the tools and the opportunity and the time to mature up and start thinking in new ways. And my recommendation has always been to take a risk-based approach, not boil the ocean, go after the key critical things that, in case of a breach or misuse, it'll bring down your business. And talk to them about segregation of duties, access controls, what they mean, least privilege. Some of those things is second nature for us in cybersecurity, but within business, it's often net new subject. So that education, awareness, and working with them to mature up and giving them time and the tools.
Yeah, if you ask me where to start, I think CIS or SANS Top 20 just lay it out for you. Start with your assets. Start with what hardware, what software you have, and catalog it. How does it then impact your different business unit? And what does it mean to your business if a specific application goes down? And start from there. Some of us in the financial district are focused more on the data because we are holding personal data. In your world, I think availability is the number one more important thing. You want to make sure that your consumers are still in the light and not in the dark. So and that's where it comes. Once I know my asset, I know in your world is my firmwares, my SCADA environment, and then how do they interact with each other, and what is the risk associated with each one of those vulnerabilities. And based on that, you prioritize how you go about automation and orchestration. Going all in with a new shiny tool would just create more noise than taking what you have right now. That's my opinion.
Okay. How are we doing for time? Okay. Yep.
Oh, sure.
Thanks. My name's Gurdip Singh. The question I have is, how do you get around the challenges where people don't really know sometimes what they're testing? So, for example, identity and access management, everyone, managers have to do a test that their staff have access to applications that they need it. With this day and age, a lot of work on people's plates, they're just clicking yes, 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 not necessarily actually doing their due diligence or understand whether if that member of staff needs that access or not. On the other hand, there may be some application owners who are testing that their applications are CIA critical assets, but they don't really know whether if it's a critical asset or something that should have been a critical asset hasn't been marked or attested to as a critical asset. How do you get around those challenges?
I can speak to your second one because we recently did that as part of our merge. So what we did was we defined a system owner for every functional total system, right? Most systems are dozens of machines and APIs and things on the internet and things not on the internet. But you get your box, which is your system. So let's say it's a CRM, for example. So you've got your CRM, you've got your CRM owner. Maybe it's manager of billing or customer experience, whatever it ends up being. That person is then consulted on a few things. What's your acceptable restore time, restore point objective is a good place to start. What kind of emergency response do we have if this thing goes down? And then we start to talk about things about how access works. Who should be able to grant it? How do you verify that that request is legitimate? What kind of review period do you want to have on existing access? Do you want us to default to turn them off after so long of not using it or things like that? You get their buy-in on it so that they own it. So we did do that with every system that we have. But there's the second problem you talked about where people just have no time, and absolutely people are just clicking. So I don't have a solution for that one.
So maybe I can talk a little bit about, so what you mentioned is actually a very common challenge, and I wish I didn't have an answer because I wish there was an easy button because I could sell it for billions of dollars probably. But really it's a complex problem and it's got multiple ways of going about it, and they all probably have to go in hand. So boils down to reducing the number of items that a tester goes through on a test. So instead of putting 1,500 things in front of a manager, probably want to reduce it to a couple of dozen things. Whether that's using what we call role constructs or access bundles to bundle a whole bunch of things together and put a business-friendly description on it so people can understand it better, or reducing the number of items that need to be attested to. So there was a time where the going industry best practice was let's attest to everything. That leads to that rubber stamp that you mentioned. People have a day job, right? So they go in and say, maintain everything. So categorizing it to say, these are the things that will break my business in case of a breach or misuse, and I'm going to attest to those. And the rest of it, I'm going to leave at the good judgment of business and operations to figure out. So that, I think, those two ways reduce it. And also making them understand, like, this is an activity, this is part of people's responsibilities. It's not just a compliance itch to scratch, for lack of a better term. Not that compliance and audit isn't important, but this is cybersecurity. It's your job and your future in this company depends on it. I think if we go down, so making people understand that, I think is very important.
Yeah, and kind of like just to add to that, like having periodic reviews, like especially let's just say when there is a employee with change from one role to another role, in order to ensure that there is no kind of like privilege creep that has happened, just making sure like, checking back on the previous rights and permissions and then making sure that yes, those are like cut down if it's not needed. So those are kind of like things that helps us to say, okay, like in terms of like reducing the number of items we want to like attest to, if we kind of like stick to this particular approach, like periodic reviews or like reassessment, that clearly helps.
Okay. Do we think we have time for another question? Thank you.
My biggest challenge with these attestations is that there's a misunderstanding of how these attestations are to be used. Sorry, is this on? Sorry. So one of the biggest challenges is when we're doing a third-party risk management assessment of a vendor we want to do business with. Their misunderstanding is we're on AWS, we don't need to be SOC 2 certified because they are. Or one of the biggest challenges is we use Stripe, so we don't need to be PCI compliant because they are. there's a misunderstanding that just because they use compliance services, that they don't have to comply themselves, and that's always been the biggest challenge. I get way too many directors of information security, directors of infrastructure say, oh, no, AWS takes care of that for us. Meanwhile, they're in an infrastructure as a service solution. They don't realize they have to take care of every component that they put in there. And so that's been my biggest challenge.
So one of the things I always tell my executive peers is you cannot actually transfer risk, and you cannot delegate failure. When stuff goes wrong because they said, don't worry, we don't need that, and you just let them get away with it, then in the end it's going to be on you. And so what we have done to deal with that exact problem, because it is literally everywhere, and almost every conversation I have when I'm starting an agreement with somebody, is we have a security SLA that we bring as part of and say, hey, please add this to the contract, and it has requirements around actions and outcomes and liability that are usually a significant enough ask that we have a real conversation, and we don't just get brushed off by someone who says we don't need to. But that is a lot of work. It's a lot of contract management, and I think it's worth it, but that's what I've done. Anyone else have a strategy for that?
If I may add, yes, we are a SaaS platform as well, and absolutely I agree with you. We need to do SOC v2, and it's a lot of work on our side. It took us almost a year to go through that, and every time we change something on our SaaS offering. And although we run on AWS or GCP, that they are SOC v2, they are not really care about security. They provide you the compute and the storage. So I would not deal with a vendor that do not have his own SOC v2, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
You had a question, right? Or a topic you wanted to...
Thank you. Just want to get your insights on integrating multiple tools from like data sharing and complexity perspective.
I would lie to you if I'll tell you it's an easy task. Again, it depends what you want to accomplish. If it's about reducing the risk, you have multiple sources that provide you risk. For example, your vulnerability assessment tools, where the data resides, what is important to protect and not, the access to those assets. And I just named 3 sources of information: asset inventory, vulnerability assessment, and compensating controls. It's most likely your technical controls like firewalls, web application firewalls, et cetera, et cetera. When you build those 3 together, you can have a very strong infrastructure protection. Now, at the application level, where the data resides, if it's encrypted or not, it's yet another facet or another layer you need to focus on. But you need to decide what is critical for your business and start from there. If access is important, availability is important, you start with the 3 that I mentioned. Now, how hard or how easy it is, it depends on the openness of the platform. Most platforms are open, but the glue to connect the openness of them may take a while. So you need to choose a vendor that not only says, I'm an open platform, but provide you a supported solution when it comes to integration. I can share with you from our perspective, we have we are open, right? But we have about 50 that are something that we develop as the integration and assure the integration, and hundreds of others that are community. And you know where you're getting into when you start an automation with something that we provide as a solution, or we provide you a community solution. I think we need to summarize it.
I want to thank everyone here for their participation. We talked about a lot of great challenges today. I think if I had one piece of advice, it would be drive it from the business. It's possible that a system may show up that IT wasn't involved in, no one technically was involved in, the contract's already signed, now you're looking at it and saying, how can I force them to do this retroactively? And so get ahead of what the business wants and make everything you measure business outcome instead of technical, and then I think that gets a lot more traction. That's not just a this talk thing, but... All right, let's thank all of our panelists for spending time with us today.